Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And I'm Uranio Pais.
And today we are talking about heart types in relationships.
I was waiting for this one, Beatrice, to know how to better relate with you.
Oh, I thought you said you were going to say to subtly criticize me about how I operate in our relationship.
See, this is the first thing you need to know, guys, about heart types in relationships. They make things so personal.
Yes, it's true. Isn't everything personal?
No, of course not.
Okay.
Only very few things are personal.
Okay, so we'll be
And this is
talking
the head type in me talking, of course, yeah.
So we'll be talking about just general tendencies and traits and patterns that heart types display when relating to others. And then we'll talk about things that make heart types really happy and also things that bother the heart types when they're in relationship with you and how you can get into trouble with them. Then lastly, we'll talk about what's good about being in relationship with heart types, how heart types make other people happy, and what might bother other people when they're in relationship with a heart type.
Yeah, and maybe we'll add a few hints as we go. But I just want to say that by heart types, we mean twos, threes, and fours on the Enneagram. And also, we will focus more during this podcast on things that these three types have in common. So we will not cover everything relationships, but mostly what there is to be known about all three.
Yes, and when we talk about the heart types, what we're referring to in specific is the idea that we all have all three centers, a head center that thinks, a heart center that's based more in emotion, and a body center that's the center of gut knowing or instinctual intelligence or movement. It's sometimes called the moving center. And each of these centers is alive and active in all of us. However, when we're identified with our personality, we overuse one center and underuse the other two. So when we're talking about heart types, we're talking about types 2, 3, and 4 because they live more from their heart center. They live more from that heart function in terms of the center of intelligence, which is, just means a way of processing information from the outside world.
Right, and in case you're interested in knowing more about the centers of intelligence, you can always come back and listen now, or if you have listened, you listen again to an early podcast we recorded. It's actually our number 2 episode called "We Are Three-Brained Beings."
So we'll be saying general things about heart types and focusing a lot on what might be common to these three types in that they live more from their heart than their body center or their head center. And there are certain things that they have in common when it comes to relating. Now, I know myself, and it's going to be hard for me to say too many things about all three types without making some distinctions between the three types, because although they share a lot in common in terms of being centered in their heart or in their emotional function, and they all three focus a lot on relationships, they will have variations in the ways they relate because these are three different types. And while we're focusing on heart types in general in relationships, I won't be able to stop myself from making a few distinctions about how the three types in this center might differ around certain things.
Yeah, well, I totally get what you're saying. Makes a lot of sense that we will need to make distinctions. What I'm wondering right now if this is already something about heart types that they want to be like special or unique, and then it's there's a tendency for talking more individually.
I think that's true. And I would say it might be related to a need to be special in the eyes of the other person. However, I think even more than that, for me, it's about being understood and understood in a clear way based on what's really true for me. And yes, I think we're already talking about an important aspect of heart types and relationships. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think being understood is a little more important to twos and fours than it might be to threes. However, I think it probably applies to all three as well.
I agree. Yeah, I think it's a hard type thing, but for threes, that gets a little hidden, and although they feel that need, they bypass it. Just looking at if results are happening, then it's okay that I'm not understood. But I do think that they feel deep inside a need for that.
Yes, although they may not always know and understand themselves as they really are, because as we know, threes very habitually and automatically can shape themselves depending on what other people value. So that is something a little bit different in threes. Although twos also what we call shapeshift. Twos also can alter their presentation to suit the other person. But I think I'm already getting maybe too mired in the differences, and I know we want to talk about some of the key patterns or tendencies in that the heart types have in general. So what would you say? I mean, let's start with the one we've already started with, which is that heart types often want to be special to the other person and know they're special, and they also want to be understood uh, as they truly are in terms of their truth. Sometimes threes can have a little bit more trouble knowing what the truth is in them, and living from that because they get so identified with an image. But what else would you add to those the general tendencies or characteristics of the way heart types relate to people?
Well, behind wanting to be understood, I think there is a very important thing, which is acknowledged and also respected in the fact that they are emotional. Because usually hard types live their lives with a lot of criticism by people who are not hard types on them being supposedly too emotional. But many times, although that might be true, many times it's a bit also about the other person not coping well with emotions themselves. So that's one thing, but I also think be that another thing is not exactly being understood, but also be seen and met by the other.
Being
um,
seen.
Seen
Being
and met.
seen. Being
Yeah.
seen. Yes, as
being
in someone sees me deeply.
Yeah, yeah, really look at me and meet me. um I think that that comes from the mirroring that is especially important for hard types. They need to feel mirrored by the person to be able to see themselves, and also they need attention, they need more feedback, they need a constant presence of the other person looking at them. Do you agree with this?
I do, and I think we need to elaborate a little bit on well, you're saying a lot of things, so I guess I wanna slow us down and really
Mhm.
identify and make sure that we are being thorough in both naming the
Yes.
list of tendencies, but also defining what each tendency is all about. So, first of all, you said that we heart types want to be acknowledged and accepted, for our emotions, and I think that's really true. It's funny because when you said that, I thought to myself, "Wow, that almost seems like a luxury," because I think so often it just doesn't really happen, you know. And I think part of this, and it points me to something else I wanted to say, which is, even having studied the Enneagram for 30 years, like I have, I feel like it's only in maybe the last you know, 5 or 10 years, and actually maybe since I've been working closely with you, and I think we talk about the Enneagram so much, and you and I talk about how we interact and how we understand each other or don't understand each other. And especially, I think, how you teach people about what it's like to be a head type, since you're a five and I'm a two. I feel like I've learned so much more about how different we each are based on what center we live from. And I think I really underestimated this before you and I started working together and teaching people like how to work with heart types, how to work with head types, how to work with body types, because I think that you have a really deep understanding of the centers, especially based on, your deep study of the Gurdjieff work. And so we are going to be focusing on heart types, and continuing to do that now. But I just want to say a piece about how important I think this is, because I think I didn't realize like how different, how fundamentally different your experiences of relationships being a head type versus what my experience is. And I think when we don't highlight that difference, that different perspective, we get into trouble with people, because I know like you and I get in trouble when I don't pause long enough to really think about just how different you are from me. For instance, how differently you relate to your own emotions, how you will have particular experiences of me being emotional that I have no idea of until you
Mhm.
really tell me. And so I guess I just want to highlight that I think this topic is very important, because if you're in relationship with someone who isn't in your same center, that right there can create a big difference in the way you experience the world, that if you don't see it and understand it and talk about it, that right there can create a lot of problems. And of course, even if you talk about it, you could still have problems, like I know
Mm.
you and I do sometimes. But at least if you name it, if you name, oh, like like you'll say, hey, remember, hello, I'm a five over here. You need to slow down when we're talking about feelings, or you need to give me a break, or can we shift and be a little more mental for a while? Those are things that I didn't really think about, that didn't occur to me before you and I really started talking about this on a more regular basis.
Yeah, I could say the very same, that I learned a lot, and I think that at times practice is way more complex than theory. And, this is really like being from different planets when people are from different triads, meaning different dominant centers of intelligence. And we've been learning quite a bit, right, B, with
Yes.
each other, and we know how hard it is to really get to a point of not only adapting, but really working through some potential issues, and more than this, having a deeper understanding, compassion, and awakening in you the center that is not dominant, not dominant for you, but is dominant for the other person. So
Yes.
that is a beautiful path, and relationships are essential for our growth, and partly because of this.
Yes. Yes. So getting back to the kind of identifying and describing the tendencies of heart types in relationship, or I think we're also talking about really key needs they have in relationship. So getting back to the in addition to wanting to be special, wanting to be understood, uh, we heart types really need our emotions to be seen as valid. Most of us have had the experience in our lives of somehow being criticized or invalidated for being emotional. And in our culture, and when I say our, I'm to some extent speaking of Western culture, but maybe more specifically the United States culture, there is a kind of a sense that being too emotional is a bad thing. And that, of course, that may get set up by head types or body types, or people who are uncomfortable with their own emotions. But I think more and more, especially since the rise of the idea of emotional intelligence, This has been shifting, but I think you still hear from people who heart types who had an experience of being told in childhood they were too sensitive, or they were stop being so dramatic, or stop being so emotional. There's we heart types often have kind of a sense of sensitivity when it comes to having our emotions invalidated or criticized. So I would say one of the things heart types need is understanding and empathy around their emotions. And and I often say that, you know, thinking, being rational is valued a lot by many cultures, but especially in the West. Feeling is sometimes seen as something lesser than thinking, as if being rational and being reasonable, relying on reason is good, and being emotional is bad. But I think what's really important to remember is that it's almost like they're two channels. There's the thinking channel and there's the feeling or the emotional channel. And good communication ideally has both of those, both channels, and we communicate clearly on both channels. So in other words, if I tell you what I'm thinking, but also tell you what I'm feeling, it's almost like I'm communicating in stereo. There's more surround sound because you're getting my thoughts, but also my emotions, which are just a different thing altogether. And sometimes we hear people say, oh, you're being irrational. Well, emotions are by definition irrational, but it's not like rational is good, irrational is bad. They're just two different things. And sometimes I think we heart types feel constantly invalidated if our emotions, if we don't have a good enough reason to feel something, or we're not feeling something that makes other people feel comfortable about what's going on. So I think I just kind of want to flesh this out because I think this will be important to all heart types, is that not only our feelings are respected and acknowledged, but they're seen as valid. Like if I'm feeling something, I don't have to explain to you why I feel that way. It should be good enough that I feel that you honor my emotion as something that's true. Now, if I want to tell you why I'm feeling it, that's more information, and that's a good thing to do. But I think sometimes we heart types feel sensitive because it's like we have to justify our feelings instead of having our emotions being accepted just on the face of them.
Yeah. One thing I learned, B, with you in our relationship is that I need to make sure I understand your feelings, that I value your feelings, that I respect your feelings, and I need to understand that I don't need to agree with your feelings, and that you will not necessarily stick to your feelings in terms of making decisions out of it. Many times, what hard types want to do by sharing their feelings is to vent them out, and also to be able to elaborate on what they might want to do. But it's confusing for me as a head type, because to me it's all logical, and if I'm saying something, I'll get to a conclusion based on what I'm saying. And then I see you sometimes changing and being very flexible, but that although you're feeling something, you go in the other direction later on.
Yes, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I think this is so important in understanding heart types. As a heart type myself, as a two, I need you, if you're in relationship with me, I need you to understand how I feel. And I need you to remember that I'm the one that tells you. In other words, you might perceive me feeling something, and you may say that. Well, you might say something like, well, you seem angry or something like that. But then I need to be able to tell you how I feel, and I need to be believed. Now, if you do, you're absolutely right. You don't have to agree with why I feel that way. You don't have to feel the same way. You don't have to agree with me if we're having a difference of opinion, but you do have to hear, understand, validate, accept my emotion. If you do that, then it's almost like the emotion has brought its information. It's told me and I've told you what's important to me based on how I feel. But my feeling can actually shift more easily once I'm understood. Now, once I've had that feeling and I express it, it could be my feeling, my mood changes. I could feel something else in a little while because feelings come and go. But the surest way for me to get sort of stuck in my feelings and angry about the fact that I'm not being accepted and understood is if you somehow argue against my emotion or you don't accept my emotion or you don't hear it or you dismiss me and so I don't get heard and then the emotion can get more intense. So let's say I'm angry at you about something, and I'm still working on communicating anger in a healthy way, staying connected and in a space of love, but also saying, and here's what makes me angry because an act of maturity is being able to love someone and express anger at the same time. When we don't stay connected and in a place of love and acceptance of the other person, that's when our anger can be expressed in destructive ways. But if I express my anger and you understand it and you understand my why I'm angry, now it's almost like, once I vented out that emotion and I've been understood based on it, it's like I can much more quickly not be angry at you anymore. But if you dismiss me, if you try to talk me out of it, if you deny the validity of my emotion, I'm going to get more angry.
Hmm.
And so this is, I think, a really important piece.
And again, for me, when I truly learned that, not only from theory, but seeing and experiencing that, it was fascinating and illuminating.
I want to go back to something you said earlier because I don't want us
Hmm.
to pass it up because it was so important. And that
Right.
is, we need heart types need to feel seen and heard. Now, this is sort of maybe goes before being understood, but being seen is very important. And what I always think of is in the movie Avatar, they communicated this idea of being seen in this special way that I think is gives big insight into how heart types want to be seen. If you'll remember, the creatures in Avatar, they had tails, they had long tails, and what would happen is two of them would wrap their tails around each other, and they would look deep in their eyes, and they would say, "I see you." Right? And so it's not just seeing in the regular sense, it's that plus like seeing deeply into the other person, seeing them at a deep level in terms of who they are, in terms of their identity, their truth, how they feel, who they are. And so I think being seen is really, really important for all the heart types. And this relates to, as you mentioned earlier, but I want to come back to because it's so important. Often in childhood, we all have the need for what's called mirroring, and it's a psychological term for the way children develop a sense of self, a positive sense of self, and a sense of self-esteem, and that is being seen by the parent and reflected back to them. It's called mirroring. So the parent sees that child and basically said, gives the message, and it's often non-verbally. It's through the facial expression, it's through emotional acceptance. It's telling the person, yes, you're good at that, or I see you doing that, and it's positive. And so it's seeing the person as they are, not the way we want them to be, or not the way we hope they are, or not the way they need to be to make us feel okay or less anxious, but as they are. And I see my child as they are. I look at them, and when they look in my eyes, they don't see a reflection just of me, but they see a reflection of them. and they are positively affirmed by that. So being mirrored is very important to all children, but it's especially important to heart type children because that's the special sense that they need. It's a special need that they have that needs to be met for being seen and accepted and loved and appreciated for who they are, and not given the message that they need to be somebody other than who they are in order to receive love. And often the heart types got that message that you need to be different somehow. You need to be someone who pleases me or someone who is what I want in a person and not just who you are. And so that's really key. And so I wanted to highlight that. And I do think being seen is related to being heard. So if I tell you something, you really sort of put your own perspective aside for a moment and really listen to me on my own terms and hear my truth and accept that as my truth. Again, you don't have to agree with me, but you do have to hear it and not just only have the filter of your own perspective up so that you can't really hear what I'm saying. And I'll have to say, thinking about my whole life, the thing that has frustrated me most in relationship is when I feel like the other person can't or won't hear me. And I can't make myself understood. So I'm trying to say, here's my truth, here's the way I see it. And the person can't really put aside their own maybe differing perspective to really hear and validate what I think or how I see something or how I feel. So I think being seen and heard is really key. Of course, it's connected to being understood. So it's all kind of the same thing, but different aspects of that. And again, as a heart type, I'm very motivated to have people understand that because I think if you're not a heart type, that these things won't come naturally to you. They won't might not occur to you. But if you understand that about the heart type in your life, it will create a lot more easy interactions. And because it's sort of the fundamentals of, I think, what we need to feel that connection.
Yeah, B, thank you for bringing all this, and I keep learning from you. Now, I want to bring another trait. My understanding is that to make sense of things, all heart types need to talk, discuss, ask. Basically, they need to be relating to others to make sense of things. This has to do also with a need for expression, and of course, it speaks to the fact that they seek for connection all the time and they try to recreate it every day, several times a day. While for other types who are not hard types, it's different. But what do you think?
Well, I do think that what we're talking about here is connection. And I think all the heart types have this really strong need to feel connected in relationship. And I think that sense of connection is built of a few different things. One, I think, is something you mentioned earlier, again, that I want to return back to and not lose, and that is that people pay attention to us. I think that's one component is you're paying attention to me, you're thinking of me, you're focusing on me, you're not distracted, you're giving me enough attention. I think sometimes, like you said, as a five, as a head type, you may feel connected without us being in conversation or directly relating or talking on a regular basis. Whereas for me, I notice if I haven't talked to you for a while and maybe you're busy and maybe you haven't answered that text I sent last night yet and it's already midday the next day, I can notice I start to feel disconnected. And that can bother me. So I think connection is very important. And I think it means paying attention to each other, knowing you have the other person's attention. And I think there is also a piece of expression. Now, I think that the three heart types differ a little bit when it comes to the importance of self-expression. I think fours are more oriented toward needing to express themselves to be understood. And that's partly because fours are more self referencing. They pay more attention to what's going on inside them. So they're very aware of how they feel often. They're very aware of or more aware of what they need and want, or uh, what their ideals are, what their goals are, what their fantasies are, what they want in relationship. They dwell in their inner feelings about that more. Whereas I think the twos and threes are more focused on the outside. We're more indexing to what do you want, and how can I please you, or how can I do something that gives you a positive impression of me or makes you want to connect with me. I think fours are a little more oriented towards self expression to engender understanding. I think for twos and threes, part of my life, I didn't know myself enough to be oriented towards self expression. Now, that said, I do think that when I talk with someone, when we are connecting, the expressing myself and the effort to do that is very important because it is part of what creates mutual understanding and connection.
Fascinating again. Yeah. Now, from my side, B, I have one last thing I want to mention as typical traits of heart types in relationships, and I want to hear what you think. And that is a bigger need for approval and recognition. That connects actually to a need for more constant positive feedback. And also, I think a little bit behind this, there is this fear of abandonment. What do you think?
Yes, I think that's true. I think for fours it's a fear of abandonment, and I think for twos it's a fear of rejection. Like open rejection is like the worst thing a two can imagine, but I think they're very similar. And I think for threes it might be, creating a negative impression, or the person having some sort of um, negative perception of them. Yes, I think we all go for approval. And we need feedback, and we may be reading in feedback uh, to what someone's doing without them saying it directly. So if you're in relationship with a heart type, it might be important to give explicit feedback or affirmation, or make an effort to say what's not working, because we really want to know. We want that feedback because we want to be able to achieve a positive connection, and we want you to feel good about us, but we may imagine very easily that you're feeling bad about us, even when you're not. Because I know for me as a two, I'm often looking at the clues, the body language, the nonverbals, the tone of voice, when was the last time you checked in with me? All of these things can speak to a sensitivity I have on my end of how am I doing with you? What's the status of our connection? What's the status of our relationship? What's the status of how we're relating to each other? And I want to feel like in a good place with you, like we're having good feelings about each other. You have a positive impression of me, a positive feeling about me. But I'm going to be really um, I have my antenna up all the time to kind of see what's going on there. And I do think that approval recognition is something that helps us feel like we're in a good place with the other person. Now, I do think that fours need, maybe the word approval is an important word to focus on. I think fours need approval a little bit less, because fours err more on the side of being authentic, and twos and threes err more on the side of being attached. So recently, I've been hearing Gabor Mate talk about this really important tension that starts in childhood between a person's ability to be authentic versus feel attached to the other person or connected. Right. So I think twos and threes will give up a little bit of authenticity, like me being who I really am, in order to feel more connected to the other person. I think fours can sometimes do that also, but I think they're more reluctant to give up authenticity to please or the other person or get their approval. However, I think of course sometimes they all often do that too. But when they do that, when they do sort of present themselves a little bit different than they actually are, I think they often know that. They're more aware of it, and sometimes it feels bad to them. But they may do it at times again because they want the other person to think well of them, to accept them. And so changing who you are to get that to happen is something all of us can do, but I would say it's important to know fours do it a little less or don't like to do it.
Hi. If you're enjoying the depth of knowledge offered in this podcast, you might want to stay in touch with us. Bea and Uranio offer professional Enneagram training, personal development courses, self-guided online courses, and they even have a membership platform with over 100 hours of content. Head to cpenneagram.com/podcast to learn more.
Okay, so tell us the secret, Big. What makes you happy in relationships and what bothers you and other hard types?
Okay. What makes me and potentially my heart type brothers and sisters happy in relationship? I would say a little bit like we've been talking about before, when someone pays attention to me, when someone shows interest in me, in knowing what I think and how I feel, when someone has an attitude of acceptance toward me, as in, no matter what I feel or no matter what I say or no matter who I am, I can be accepted, I can be appreciated, I can be loved. I don't have to um, I don't have to prove myself or earn the love or be something other than I am to be loved. Now, of course, identified with my personality as a two, I often will do many things to try to get the love because I think there's a deeper belief in me that I may not be able to deserve love or receive love just as I am. And so I think this is a core piece of being sensitive to not being accepted as I am, and sometimes reading in the message into what other people do, that if I don't present myself in the way that's acceptable to them, I'll be somehow rejected or abandoned.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing all that, B. Um, Tell us more about what bothers you a lot. What are the things that really push your buttons?
Am I done saying what makes me happy? That was a short conversation.
So if
I'm just
I
warning you, I do have things that bother me, but are you sure you want the
yeah,
happy part to be that short?
so I just yes, I do really want to hear more about the happy part, and but I also just want to say that this might indicate that at times hard types have quite a bit of expectations, from how people what they should do so that they are happy.
Are you saying it takes too much to make me happy?
Well, I'll say it more clearly.
What are you
From
saying?
what I'm trying to say, and I'll be very honest here, is that from a mental type perspective, hard types sometimes feel a little high maintenance.
High maintenance. Okay, yes. Right, right. So, as a heart type, I have to say one of my first feelings is feeling a little hurt by that. Right now, I
Yeah.
know you, Uranio, well, and I've developed a thicker skin, so it doesn't really hurt me that you say that, and I know that I can be high maintenance, especially from your point of view.
I'm not really talking about you. I'm talking in general. I mean, it's,
Don't you remember the beginning
see
of this
how hard types make
conversation?
it personal.
Yes, that's what I said. It always feels personal. It's like, how could it not be? I'm here and you're there, you're you and I'm me.
Mhm.
Isn't it personal? What else would it be? I mean, you and I have a business relationship in addition to our friendship, but
I don't want to make things worse, but I was thinking of several people, not only about you, that I have had relationships in the past.
okay, I'm not saying it's only me. I'm saying as a heart type, this is the kind of sensitivity that we walk around with.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like
And
that.
maybe this short talk is already proving what I meant by high maintenance.
Yes. And again, it may be just from the perspective of someone who's not a heart type.
Yes, exactly.
Seeing
Yeah,
seeing the high
totally.
maintenance is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
So yes, we can be specific in what we want and need or how we see things. But I would say going back to what makes us happy, I think paying attention to us, wanting to connect with us, expressing interest in us, um, appreciating us for who we are, giving us compliments and recognition, pausing long enough to listen to us and to connect on a deeper level if that's the nature of our relationship or what we both want. I'll stop there.
Oh, fantastic, B. Thanks for teaching me again about all that. And it's so easy to forget, so I'm sorry for all the times that I have bypassed all that. Now, is it time for us to talk a bit about other people in relationship with heart types, or would you like to add anything first?
I guess one thing that occurs to me about the high maintenance thing is it's funny because I think for much of my life as a two, I thought I was low maintenance, but I was really more high maintenance than I admitted to myself, first of
Oh,
all.
I see.
And
It's
second of all, I think me becoming more high maintenance is actually it's a sign of growth in me as a two, because in the
yes,
past I wouldn't say anything, I wouldn't want to have a conflict with anyone, I would hold back my opinion and my feelings because I wanted to be low maintenance. I wanted other people to perceive me that way. But of course, the more that I would deny my own truth, the more unhappy and needy I get inside myself, which can
yeah,
lead to being more high maintenance because your neediness is leaking out in the ways you act, and
yeah,
you're not able to be more direct and straightforward and then ask for what you need in a more direct way
exactly.
that can
Yeah,
be
good
just
points.
normal human
Good
level.
points. Yeah, thank you. So, okay, B. So, what bothers you in relationships?
So I think what bothers me most in relationship is any kind of message that the person doesn't care, being ignored, especially in circumstances where I think I shouldn't be ignored. So maybe like on my birthday,
Yeah,
or when we've made a special appointment to get together and talk. If you're distracted, then that feels hard. So I would say all the time you want to be listened to, you want a person's attention, but especially if that's part of what's supposed to be happening. So getting ignored, not being paid attention to, being dismissed. Sometimes there are ways when if I express my feelings, and sometimes it can feel hard to do that because there's a fear that we have that our feelings won't be accepted. But if I express my feelings and I feel dismissed, that can be really hard. As I said before, if you get dismissed or you don't feel seen, heard, met, understood, it's like my feelings get more intense. As a two, if I can deliver my feelings and be heard and accepted, it's like the feelings are free to go away. But if you don't hear me, then it's like I get more angry or I get more upset, or my feelings intensify, I get more sad. And now you're contending with me in a way where my feelings have gotten more heightened. And if there's a dynamic in the relationship where the person has, fear or discomfort with hearing my strong emotions, the more you don't want to hear it, the sort of more intense my feelings get. And then if I try in a new way to communicate them, likely it'll be more charged or more reactive. And of course, if I get that way, you're less likely to hear my emotions, and then I get more upset that you're not. So there can be a dynamic in relationships where the less I feel heard, the more intense my emotions get. The more intense my emotions get, the harder it is for me to communicate in a way that you might hear, because it's harder for me to manage my emotions. It's harder for me to not have them leak into the way I'm communicating. And then it'll be harder for you to hear me. So I think being aware of that kind of dynamic can be really important, because it really bothers me. Because again, a lot of us heart types have heard all our life, you're too sensitive, you're taking things too personally, you have too thin a skin, you're too dramatic, you're too emotional, you're making a big deal about nothing. There are a lot of these things that we've heard that have been really painful, and sometimes have made us go against our own feelings inside ourselves. So not feeling accepted, being told I'm irrational, being told I want too much, being told I am too much, being told that I shut the other person down, or that my feelings make the other person feel a certain way or do a certain things. And I think sometimes we have this idea that other people's emotions make us feel a certain way. And it's important to recognize that we all make ourselves feel a certain way. Sometimes it's in response to what someone else is doing, but to be blamed for either what you don't like about how I'm feeling, or how my feelings make you feel, that feels unfair, and that can be hard too.
Mm, wow. I wonder how many of our listeners are thinking, like I am right now. Wow, I've made so many mistakes with hard times in my life. So, when people realize all that, what is the good first movement to solve it? Be what do you expect that people do as a first movement towards solving the issues?
Well, I think one of the first things people can do is own their own feelings and reactions. Like if someone comes to me uh, and they're owning their own part in an interaction we've had, they're owning their own feelings instead of maybe seeing me as the only emotional person. If they're saying, I realize I was angry, or I realize I got upset, or I realize I had a reaction, that feels great, because if you take responsibility for your thoughts and feelings, for your part in the interaction, that gives me a lot of room to feel like I'm not being blamed in some ways for your reaction. And I have more room to also take accountability for my part. I have the freedom to take more responsibility for the impact my emotions may have on you. Now, again, if you say it in terms of impact and not in terms of blame or judgment, then it'll be a lot easier for me. And so, if you own your part, and if you show a lot of understanding and respect and acceptance of my
Mhm.
position and my feelings, then we can usually pretty easily untangle what's happening.
Yeah, it also seems to me that hard types want to see and experience how much you care, really, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to talk about other people in relationship with hard types. Um, so I might start saying a few things that I believe are blessings in having friendships and intimate relationships or being having a relative who's a hard type. I think that they bring usually a lot of joy to the environment. I think they're again very expressive, and they connect, and they cheer things up, and that to me includes force. Yeah, I just want to make sure people get that. Another thing is um, being really aware when there is an issue in the relationship and address it. I think that is brilliant. It's needed, although sometimes in the bother side, I at least feel that there are a bit more moments to discuss the relationship than I would prefer. But anyway, I think it's a brilliant quality. Yeah, so these two things, do you want to comment on them, or to talk about other things that you see that are blessings for other people in relationship with hard types?
Yes, so I want to expand on the ones that you said, and maybe add a couple more. I think that yes, I think emotions add dimension to our relationships, right? And oftentimes that's a positive or good feeling dimension. So the feeling of being in love, and this can be with anyone. It can be with your dog. It can be with your best friend. It doesn't have to be an intimate partner. But I think I often feel a feeling of deep admiration, respect, love for the people I'm close to, and often will voice that. And so I think feeling good, having positive feelings, whether it's joy, excitement, um, uh, just having the stimulation of a deep connection, is a huge positive. It's what gives meaning to our lives, I think, in to a large extent. But also even the difficult feelings. I think pain is the flip side of joy. And as much pain as you allow yourself to feel, that's how much joy and happiness you can feel. And I do think that if you can accept both, and that we heart types will bring both,
Mhm.
then it makes relationships richer, deeper, more satisfying. It makes connections that can be supportive in your life. So, feeling supported by someone and feeling supported through a heart connection. One time, a long time ago, when I was facilitating T groups, it's a particular form of group process. I'll never forget one of the pieces of positive feedback. One of the students in the group, I was the facilitator, but I was modeling, ways to be. One of a good piece of feedback I got from a guy in the group was he said, one of the things I really appreciate you is I can feel you. Like when you say things to me, I feel it. And so it's like speaking to this deeper dimension of this heart to heart connection, and how good that can feel. And again, there can even be good in pain, of when you feel pain, to be met in that pain, to be accompanied in that pain, to be with someone in that pain. It makes you feel less alone in the world. I think it can be a relief to people who feel a kind of existential solitude. And so being connected is something that I think comes with, the heart type's ability to so easily bring emotion to their interactions with people. Now, another thing I want to say that's related to what you said, but I think it is more explicit, is I think we are in the business of reading people. Right now, I think this is a
Mhm.
little bit true for twos and threes on a more regular basis, but fours do it as well a lot of the time. And that is, we're tuning in to the other person. We try to be attuned, and this is something we all need, even at a basic human level in child development. We all need to feel attuned to. And I think heart types, especially when we're healthy and in a good place with ourselves, are really good at empathizing and attuning to other people and being with them in their feelings and supporting them in whatever they're feeling and helping them in what they're feeling. And so we're tuning in. And I think part of that attunement is how relationships happen, because we tune into each other, and we hear and receive each other, and we come together in a kind of mutual connection that's based on what we both think and feel and sense and experience, and our openness to really taking in the other and empathizing. Of course, I think that empathy is a huge plus for people who are in a relationship with heart types. Now, again, we're not 100% empathetic all the time, but I do think we have a deep capacity for empathy, and we do bring a regular attention to empathizing with each other.
Wow, I think that without willing to do that, you've just done the best ever promotional speech for hard types when people consider having them in their lives. And I think that you guys should write all that in your profiles in those apps for matching, you know.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Anyway, it's true. I think I think that companionship also, and they care about you, and they show that, and it's true, and it's deep. And I was going to mention empathy if you hadn't already. Um, Anything else, or can we say a little bit without you getting too sad about the things that might bother other people?
I think it's important to say what might bother other people about heart types and relationships. And I think it starts with the fact that a lot of types that aren't heart types can have a fear of emotion or discomfort with emotion. And this is completely understandable if it's not where you live. And maybe you may have had experiences in your past of being hurt by people who are really emotional, especially if it's not your comfort zone. So I would say that we can be too intense when we get emotional, if we're not careful, if we're not learning and in the process of learning to be more aware of our emotions and more aware of what we need to do to process and manage our own emotions, we can be emotionally reactive. So we can, in some ways, not be careful about how we communicate when we're emotional, and we can hurt people. Often without intending to, sometimes with intending to, and sometimes we can be messy. And other people who aren't used to being emotional can feel overwhelmed by us. They can feel shut down by us. They can feel alienated and hurt. And I think often we heart types aren't trying to do that at all. That's not our intention. And yet we can be, when we're in touch with an emotion, if we're not careful, we can be really driven by that raw emotion in a way that we don't pay enough attention to channeling that emotion in a conscious way, so that we're taking responsibility for it and we're filtering it before we interact with the other person, before we communicate about what's going on. And we can lash out, we can um, be irresponsible with how we express our emotions in the way that can have different kinds of negative impacts on others.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for acknowledging all that. And also, I want to add only one thing that sometimes bothers people who are not hard types, who are in relationship with hard types. And that is the very fact that hard type people adapt maybe too much to them. So what I mean by this is that with some less of this tendency for force, but still, there's this thing that hard types do, which is starting to like what you like, starting to follow a little bit your agenda to make sure that they are liked by you, and shapeshift a bit to the other in the relationship. But that comes to a cost. First, the other person sometimes notices that there is a dissatisfaction in the hard type, and there's something missing there. Where are you, right, in the relationship? And the second thing is that comes with the cost of disappointment inside that is not voiced early enough, and then later on it becomes a bigger issue. So do you agree with this at all, B?
I do. And I do think that all heart types can do it, but I think fours do it less. But yes, we can adapt to be more who the other person wants us to be, but then resent the person for that, and not take enough responsibility for the fact that of being aware if we're doing that and knowing what the cost is of that to us, and voicing in a clear way, in a compassionate way, when that's happening. And I think for twos especially, I think we can even be intrusive uh, with our feelings or with our view of what's happening or what should happen, especially if we have this sense of, we've done all this for you. We've even changed who we are to please you. And it can really lead to resentment and even alienation. And I also want to say another thing is I think sometimes heart types, again, because we don't know what it's like not to be a heart type, we cannot be sensitive enough to people who aren't as comfortable with emotion or with communicating emotion or what it's like to live in emotion. We cannot be sensitive enough to just maybe how hard it can be for a head type or a body type to relate to us in an ongoing way when we're really emotional or when we get into, conflict with each other. It can be hard for us to even understand what that person needs and feels, but I think sometimes it means we need to kind of slow down and check in more. And again, potentially hold our feelings back until there's a real opening on the other side. But overall, I think we need to be sensitive to that.
Hmm. Wow. Anything else you would like to add to this last list?
I think one thing I would say is in the form of a hint to people who aren't heart types but who are in relationship with heart types is something that you can do that I think will make it easier for you and for the heart type person in your life is to be aware of your own attitudes about emotions generally, your emotions and other people's emotions. Because I think sometimes other people have fear of feelings or discomfort with all feelings or some feelings. And I think sometimes that they can act that out in their relationship with heart types and maybe unconsciously dismiss or avoid relating to us when we're emotional or on the emotional level. And I think that, again, it just creates confusion for both people, and it can make the heart type person feel bad. And then when we feel bad, we relate differently and we can get reactive. And so I think um, for all people in the relationship to have as a practice getting more clear about how are you relating to your own emotions and how well are you in touch with them, and do you have judgments of yourself or others who are emotional. And once you can get just clear on that, because we all have judgments, we all have biases, we all have perceptions. Once you get more clear about your own relationship to emotions, then that can help you be cleaner in your relationship with heart types.
Wow, I loved all that, B. And I want to thank you really so much for sharing precious and useful information about heart types in relationships.
It's time for our top five.
What is our top five today, B?
Our top five is the top five most chatty types.
Okay, and can you define that better? Like, bring in more words to explain what we want to talk about.
I think we're talking about someone who is very talkative, who easily engages in light conversation and even enjoys talking a lot, maybe even uses a lot of words and talks maybe too much at times, but someone
Not very
who's
objectively, maybe at
maybe,
times.
maybe. I think I mean, it can be sort of, there can be a positive thing in terms of enjoying interaction or enjoying talking to people, but also maybe, um,
Sometimes being confusing.
or sometimes maybe talking too much and not realizing they're talking too much. Maybe it's something like that.
Or taking some time to get to the point.
Maybe. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so there are good and bad things about being, the first one on
The
this.
most chatty person. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't see it as necessarily good or bad. It just is, but I think it's
Maybe it's the five in me that gets triggered.
yeah,
About that.
exactly. I think you are naturally, that's your own type bias, seeing chatty is a bad thing. Whereas as a self-preservation too, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. I think you could
Which
be,
can also be a bias.
yes, but you could be like unfocused and scattered chatty, or you could be interesting and engaging chatty. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Okay. So what is your number five?
My number five is, and it's funny because I came up with my top four pretty easily, and I had a little bit of trouble thinking of a fifth. So this may not be the most obviously chatty person, but I was thinking self-preservation one.
Interesting.
They can often be very warm and friendly, and they knowledgeable. They can be talkative and chatty at times.
Yeah, I guess I consider mostly the not so good aspects of being chatty. So I didn't include ones because I think they are very objective. Even if they talk a lot, they don't take long to get to one point.
Yes, I think you're right that the one can be very precise and concise in the way they talk, and so maybe we wouldn't think of them as chatty. What I was thinking of with the self-preservation one are the ones that as a result of repressing anger get excessively polite and friendly. That
Yeah.
can be really chatty almost as a way of being really warm and friendly and polite and correct as a reaction formation against anger. So
Right.
to the degree they repress their anger, and self-preservation ones repress anger the most of the three ones, they will be really friendly and outgoing potentially. Not every self-preservation one will be this way, but many.
Yeah, and I get your point now. And also, I think that even social ones can be chatty in terms of being preachy, And yeah, so, but my number five is type 2. I think that 2s at times can be very talkative, can be um, a lot communicative also, but at times with the flattery and the comments that they make about others, they can be a little chatty.
So what's your number 4?
My number 4 is type 3, and I will explain because I know that many 3s are very objective. I'd say especially self-pressed 3s, but there are some 3s, sometimes sexual, sometimes social, that I've seen in my life that really speak a lot, and they have a fun thing that they are very impatient when it comes to other people being chatty, but they are chatty themselves. So I've seen 3s make very long speeches or tall or monopolize meetings or really taking very long to express whatever they wanted. So 3 is my number 4, but it's not among the main ones.
I see. Yeah, I've known 3s that could be chatty. I would say especially self-preservation and one-to-one 3s or sexual 3s. So I know what you mean. Although they, like you said, often don't have a high tolerance for chattiness in others. So my number 4 is self-preservation 6. And this is because sometimes I believe self-preservation 6s, they can look a little bit like 2s. They cope with fear by being friendly and warm and outgoing, and they can often be quite chatty in service of that friendliness and warmth.
Yeah, that's a good point. My number 4 is my number 3 is also self-press 6, and 6s in general, but especially self-press 6s, because of the very same reasons you've just talked about. And trying to be nice and warm, they sometimes are very talkative. So, what is your third, B?
So my third is 9, and especially social 9 and maybe sexual 9, because I don't think self-preservation 9s are necessarily chatty. Like, for instance, I have a couple of self-preservation 9 friends who don't like to talk on the phone. They don't like to talk at length. For instance, one of my self-preservation 9 friends, whenever she even texts, she uses the absolute minimum amount of letters and words in her text. Like, instead of saying okay, she'll just write a K. I was thinking more of social 9 mainly because I think social 9s can be very talkative, friendly, outgoing, congenial. And so social 9 was my number 3.
Oh, okay. And your second?
And my second was 2. I ranked them higher than you did because I have known quite a few 2s that can be quite chatty and talkative. And again, sometimes I think it goes with friendliness, sometimes it goes with wanting to interact with people, and sometimes it's just sort of having a lot to say to make themselves understood or to attempt to make themselves understood.
Yeah, maybe I should have ranked choose higher. Yeah. Well, for me, it was almost impossible to decide between my first and my second, and I went with sevens as my second. Maybe especially sexual sevens, but all sevens, all three subtypes can be very chatty and sometimes never get to the point. And not only that, sevens sometimes have a preference for not wrapping things up, to leave things open. And it's the storytelling style of communicating, and they go round and round, and they include other themes, and they don't finish necessarily all of them. So I think they many times can be chatty, and they think out loud. Like they don't necessarily plan for what they are going to communicate, and their thinking style is a bit chaotic for what most people think, because they join different dots, and so that can, as a consequence, be very chatty.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, which is why type 7 is in my number one position. Because of all you said, I think often sevens can be very talkative and chatty. And I would say, especially at lower levels of awareness, they can really talk a lot and sometimes be a bit unfocused in their talking. But they can be chatty. And I would also say sevens of any subtype, because I think sometimes, as you said, sexual sevens can be the most chatty, but also I think self-preservation sevens can be chatty. They can also be a little bit on the quiet side, but when they talk, they can talk.
Right. And my number one is 9. Maybe I should have put 7 on number one, but I know I just see what I call sometimes the communication style of saga. It's like telling a story from the very beginning and coming back to the beginning if you interrupt them. So it's a little bit like, and if they sense that people are not happy, they will be even more chatty because of stubbornness. And I just see that at least some 9s go beyond the point that 7s go to. But I agree that there are more 9s that are not chatty than there are 7s who are not chatty. So it was very difficult for me to get to a conclusion, but 9 ended up being my number one.
Okay, so that was an interesting top 5. Thank you for listening, and join us again for our next Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.